This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real events or persons is purely coincidental. This story is purely fictional and does not promote or encourage any form of violence. Dear but Rock, we're well aware of your scouting mission, and I must admit that it leads to many questions of many different councils, especially the Exploratory Council. They have reviewed the logs on your explorer, and they attest that you did not cover up this finding. Why would I cover it up? Wrath interrupted. He was growing extremely uneasy with this conversation. He had ideas of what he'd face on piracy charges, but he never expected this. I didn't find any blast life forms. Jack's face became genuinely comforting. He spoke in soothing, reassuring tones. Mr. Scampion, please relax. You have nothing to worry about. I tried to make that clear earlier. I would have thought your greatest concern would have been possible charges over your own confession of intended piracy. That is absolutely, positively no longer a worry for you. We are going to forget about your previous intentions. It somewhat sullies this momentous occasion. In all honesty, it would be difficult to concede that the first human to land on Fenrir was a raider's. You will be remembered as an explorer. It will also be explained that you were brought back to Fenrir to satisfy health concerns. That will also apply to Mr. Smeel. This has also been satisfied. There is no danger of alien viruses, as we have tested both the first human to land on Fenrir and his first human contact. Everything you should be afraid of is no longer a concern. Wrath was not relieved. But what about this other stuff? This nonsense about a life form? What am I up against with this? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Jack stated, almost pleasingly. There's going to be some questions, but not about your intentions. We need to know why your scanners didn't pick up the life signs, though there are some theories. That is another reason you're still here. The three of us are going to make another landing on Fenrir today using your explorer vessel. We're going to recreate the landing sequence and rescan the planet within the atmosphere. It will test the validity of certain assumptions and hopefully provide the answer to why the life forms were not found by your ship. 5. Fenrir revisited. The cockpit closed about the three men, left little room for movement, and even less consideration for safety. But Jack had insisted that all three of them be present for atmospheric entry of Fenrir. Wrath thought the company might calm his nerves. At least he hoped it would. It didn't. When the explorer began to shake at the conflict of entry, he broke into a cold sweat. The lack of space compounded his discomfort, and when he felt the lurch of gravity taking hold, he almost vomited. Do you always get this upset on re-entry? Jack questioned. It's not usually this bad, Wrath gasped, struggling for control of his innards. It's just a little close in here. I'm used to being alone. A heavy shake throughout his body closed Wrath's mouth. But your body doesn't like this type of motion, does it? Jack pressed. Wrath took a moment, swallowed hard. The taste of whatever was in the back of his throat burned going back down. Finally, he found the voice to respond. I guess not. But like I said, it's usually not this bad. Outside the view shield, the orange flares finally died away, and the sky turned a bright blue. The stars disappeared as the atmosphere of Fenrir swallowed the explorer completely. Flight controls brought the vessel to a slow descent, and the great turbulence of atmospheric entry ceased. The council coordinator turned to Lar. How about you? Do you feel bad? No, not really. Lar looked more lost than sick. I don't get to experience this that much. I don't know what to expect. And indeed, he peered out the view shields with a newfound curiosity. He almost ignored Jack's continued questions. How about air sickness? Do you ever feel uncomfortable in a shuttle or a skimmer? Lar just shook his head. So this is no real problem for you? No, I guess not. Jack turned a critical eye back to Wrath, but spoke loud enough so that Lar could hear. Your concentration is not the best at this moment, is it? Wrath was indeed paying more attention to his own problems than to Jack's questions. Huh. This nonsensical word highlighted Wrath's discomfort, as well as his mixed concentration, and Jack nodded to Lar. That may explain some things. Wrath wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead. He fought off a final wave of nausea with a sense of indignity. What things? You don't like re-entry and you seem to have a fear of heights. During your first Explorer, these factors could have caused you to miss something. I checked my screens, Wrath argued. I always check my screens and the view shields. It's part of my job. Yes, I won't argue that. But that's not really my point. You seem much more concerned with your own discomfort. I'm not saying it's a crime, but it could have caused you to miss something. The height of the craft still left Wrath far from comfortable. The possibility of losing power and falling continued to strike at his consciousness like a loose shutter in a windstorm. But Jack's accusations found their way through the fear, brought out an anger which flushed his face. How could I miss something like life on a planet? I mean, it's there, or it's not. If I look out and see nothing but rock, what else am I supposed to look for? Jack scanned the nav coordinates. Take a quick look now, both of you. What do you see? Wrath pointed to the brown and yellow landscape. His voice held a tone of vindication. The same thing I saw when I first scouted this planet. Nothing. Lar nodded his head in agreement. This is exactly what I saw before. Wrath continued. I don't care how sick I feel. There's nothing down there to see. Jack smiled. Of course, this is what you saw before. I brought you in at an orbit to mimic your first Explorer. This is the same flight path. What you see now is exactly what you saw before you initiated automatic landing. But I would like to point something else out. At a higher altitude, more of the surface would have been visible. If we checked the view screens at that point, the view might have been different. Wrath shook his head obstinately. But I'm sure I made a visual check at initial entry during my first Explorer. Even if there was something to see then, I would have noticed it. Are you certain? Jack questioned almost sternly. He did not press with hostility, but he offered his own explanation with a degree of confidence. Remember how badly you felt. You probably did check your visual screens, but how much attention did you give them? Surely if this planet was covered with plant life, you would have noticed. But based on your discomfort, even you would have to admit that a small pocket, a trace anomaly compared to the full expanse of the planet's surface, might escape your attention. Wrath wasn't so sure. It sounded plausible. Then again, it sounded impossible. If there was life on this planet, he was certain he would have spotted it. Jack interrupted with a stern command. Set your ship for automatic landing sequences, just as you did during your first Explorer. More out of instinct than obedience, Wrath ordered landing site selection and approach. The Boscon props shook the vessel as they gently lowered the craft for landing. Wrath exhaled as he welcomed the sensation of the props beating against hard ground. When the ship settled into touchdown, he wiped the last few beads of cold seat from his head. Quiet settled into the cockpit as Wrath shut off the engines. Jack stared intently at the pilot. What? Wrath responded uneasily. Complete your checkoff and take us outside. Wrath shrugged, checked the atmospheric readings, and prepared for disembarking. He led Jack and Lar out of the starboard hatch. This time he didn't hold his breath or run from the craft. He stood beside it, smelling the cooling metal. It threatened to bring back a touch of nausea, but he fought off any further sickness. A lifeless desert welcomed them. Jagged brown rocks jutted up from the horizon in every direction. The surface was parched and hard, dust, sand, and rock. Nothing more. Certainly not the garden spot of Fenrir, Jack admitted. I'm not convinced there is a garden spot, Wrath countered. Jack just smiled. Take us on a walk. I'm sure you normally do a foot explorer. Absolutely. But you're just going to see what I see now. Oh, by the way, my portable is scanning for life signs. There's no reading. Nothing. I don't doubt that at all, Jack responded, sounding anything but defeated. The three ambled for some time through the barren landscape. The scenery held rugged beauty but no indication of life. Finally, Jack made his last request. Take us to the point where you obtained your load of emeralds and rubies. Wrath frowned and did not move. Jack waved his hand almost apologetically. Don't worry. I'm not trying to obtain any kind of evidence against you. I just want to retrace your trail. It's an order from the councils. It's the last step in verifying why you didn't find the Fenrites on your first explorer. Wrath huffed a heavy breath but finally conceded. He brought them to a small pit where he had used the laser miner to scratch away the rock surface. He watched Jack carefully, still unsure of the coordinator's motives. Jack just scratched an eyebrow. His narrow features appeared to thin even more under the heat. Why don't we get back to the ship? It's hot out here and I'm getting tired. There's still much for us to see. Considerable challenges indeed. Dr. Sinclair took a handkerchief and wiped the side of her neck. Warmth in the council room didn't create her perspiration. Questions and concerns over the Fenrites raised her anxiety, and the layers of flesh simply did the rest. I suppose we should examine the most obvious problem. The growth rate of the Fenrites is expanding exponentially. The gestation period is much shorter than Dr. Eurobian estimated. Multiple births also seem to be the rule rather than the exception. Colonies are teeming with newborns and growing infants. For those of you that worried of the immediate repercussions of overpopulation, I have a leading report which puts some of those concerns to rest. The Fenrites will not starve. To their credit, they have found their own solution to the restricted food supply. They have examined the plant life instilled for them and found the crop which grows the fastest and provides the greatest nutrition. They are using this food source to its greatest potential. Our scanners are already picking up extensive tracts of land utilized to support current as well as future population growth. As they deplete that which was initially provided for them, the larger than anticipated harvests will more than compensate for the loss. In effect, the Fenrites are adapting to their explosive growth by farming much larger areas of land than we expected. This will, of course, alter Dr. Morgan's planned ecosystem. A much larger percentage of Fenrir's surface will be changed from desert into farmland. A small consequence. We have many scanning reports which will provide enough data to assert our claim of Fenrir's desert-like conditions before this alteration. This new phenomena will simply be attributed to the stage of development the Fenrites achieved upon our discovery of their civilization. It will be considered part of their evolution and nothing more. Perhaps even more interesting, the Fenrites show particular skill toward utilizing the surrounding lands as efficiently as possible, but with a mind to future needs as well. While their main objective is to create a sufficient, reliable, and quickly available food supply, they are not ignoring other alternatives. They seem to be instinctively avoiding our own ancestors' agricultural mistakes, which led to the potato famine and the Dust Bowl. I would theorize that they have actually retained a far greater percentage of the agricultural knowledge planted within their memory than we would have imagined. There is little else which would explain their instinctive actions to refrain from overburdening the soil and relying on a single crop. Perhaps their simple-mindedness and lack of independent thought allowed for such absorption, like pets learning a new trick. Sinclair folded her hands, and a frown creased her lips downward. But now to the problem. We are uncertain as of yet as to the true lifespan of a Fenrite. Dr. European gives us some insight as to an estimate, but nothing that we can count on with any great reliance. Even if we take the short end of the estimate, the Fenrite population will still grow at a staggering rate. If such growth continues, they will eventually reach a point where there is simply not enough land to cultivate. While it is nothing that threatens them in the near term, in the long run they will face food shortages. Some of my associates have offered solutions, none of which I can support. From the ill-conceived notion of creating a predator to the vastly more compassionate but no less damaging alternative of supplementing the Fenrites with food shipments from our own ag planets, I assert that we must allow the Fenrites to find their own solutions, as they have already shown a propensity to achieve. Let them deal with the problem, and let us learn from it. That, after all, is the basis of this entire experiment. Food shortages may lead to other events which our colleagues from different councils are eager to watch. Monitoring riots, war, and the political development stemming from such calamities is just another form of understanding our own past. We must allow the different branches of the scientific community to observe their fields of interest. Remember, we are not here to solve the Fenrites' problem. A problem, I must remind some, that does not exist nor will exist for some time. We can make all the projections and estimations over what might happen a century or two from now, but that does not alter the basic intent of our experiment. We merely must watch how they deal with critical junctures in their own development. The variations and similarities will tell us a great deal about our own historical decisions. We did not create this organism to dictate its lifestyle. We proceeded with this grand experiment to watch the internal development of an alien civilization. To interfere, even with the best intentions, is to break the foundation which is the cause for the Fenrites' very existence. Now, for some good news. She rubbed her hands together as she took a surveying glance around the council chambers. We have the Explorer pilot that made the initial investigation of Fenrir, the only human to physically explore Fenrir before inception. Due to some genuine luck, achieved by the forthright decision to have the authorities secure the system, the pilot was caught attempting to raiders gems from the planet. He never turned over his report to a local exploratory commission, and thus there was never a need to intercept the planet from the Council of Colonization. We have detained the pilot for some time, even allowed health officers to conduct extensive tests to satisfy their own fears that there are no communicable diseases on Fenrir. Now, a close associate of mine is debriefing the Explorer pilot and clearly removing any threats that he might represent. "All right, Mr. Scampion," Jack pointed to the flight controls. "Why don't you get us airborne, but don't take us into orbit? I want you to keep us in the atmosphere for a little aerial reconnaissance." Roth grimaced. "What altitude?" "Set it for 15,000 meters. That should be high enough." Roth voiced the order, and the Explorer rumbled with life. The Boscon props powered the craft into vertical liftoff, then propelled the Explorer into a standard flight path at the proper altitude. "Now let's take a look at these terminal screens, shall we?" Jack requested. "Please activate all exterior cameras and use them to scan the surface." Roth grudgingly activated all viewing cameras, and the far-reaching landscape of Fenrir filled the monitors. A touch of vertigo struck him as each terminal flaunted their position high in the sky. He swallowed hard to beat back the growing unease. The only comfort he found existed in the drab appearance of the landscape. Brown and orange rock formations filled the terminal screens. The desert surrounded them and surpassed the limit of the camera range. "See?" Wrath nearly shouted. "There's nothing out there." He paused for a moment to let the display screens accent his point. After nodding his head, he let his anger flow freely. "What the chaos is this all about? You tell us there's a life form down there, some kind of ape lizard thing, and there's nothing here." Jack said nothing. He just watched the screens. Wrath grew even more annoyed with the silent response. His anger allowed him to forget his discomfort. "How long are we going to stay up here? There's nothing down there." Jack waited a few more seconds and then looked to Lar. "What about you, Mr. Smeal? Are you convinced there are no life forms on this planet?" "I guess so," Lar confessed. "I don't see... Wait, what's that over there?" "Where?" Jack asked calmly. Lar pointed to a corner of the view screen. "That." Wrath turned his gaze to the point of contention. He stared at a speck of green. He blinked, but it remained. "Can you zoom the lens anymore, Mr. Scampion?" Wrath stuttered. "A little." He adjusted a control, and the green spot filled a larger portion of the view screen. "Why don't you change course and head in that direction? Keep your altitude at 15,000 meters, for now anyway." Wrath didn't respond. His attention remained fixed on the monitor. "Mr. Scampion." "Yeah, I'll adjust the course." As the Explorer vessel veered toward the anomaly, the green area began to grow, to encompass more and more of the landscape. Within moments, the shadows of plant life filled the entire lower portion of the bow camera angle. "Gentlemen, let me introduce you both to alien life." There was no true definition to the picture at this point. They were both too far and too high to determine what kind of plant life nestled itself into the soil. But the existence, as well as the spread of the anomaly, was no longer debatable. Wrath shook his head almost violently as he argued the obvious. "This isn't possible." He switched off the aft and starboard cameras and diverted monitors to sensor readings. He pointed to the screens with renewed vigor. "Look, there's no reading on the sensors. They're not picking up anything. This is some kind of trick." "Widen the array," Jack advised. "I am shooting a wide pattern array. This isn't right." He fumbled with the controls. He matched the board setting with the readouts. The manual controls indicated they were indeed on wide focus, but the sensor patterns themselves indicated a narrow band. "What's wrong?" Jack asked with a look of concern. "The sensors are shooting a band that doesn't match the controls." "I don't understand," Jack noted innocently. Wrath frowned before he explained. He slapped and twisted a few more controls, even requested computer analysis. "Check sensor integrity. Analyze beam pattern." The computer replied instantly. "Sensor reflection within normal parameters. Wave structure uninterrupted. Beam pattern 10 square kilometers." "That can't be." Wrath looked to Jack. "The sensor waves are only rebounding off a fraction of the planet's surface. Can you increase the width?" "Blast it, I have. I've got the controls on maximum. On these settings, I should be getting half the planet. There's nothing else for me to turn up." "Wait, I can turn control over to the computer." He voiced the order. "Computer override on sensors. Ignore manual controls. In fact, shut down the cockpit board. Maximum scan of the planet for living organisms. Insufficient data. Unable to match readings." "Readings? What do you mean insufficient data?" Jack nodded. "That was the first reading received by an orbital scanner 5-star systems from here. An anomaly." Wrath barely choked out one last request of the computer analysis. "Define existing readings within known standards. Ignore unrelated material. Chloroplasts, carbohydrates, amino acids, located within numerous complex organic compounds capable of metabolism. Jack grinned ear to ear, but still his teeth did not show. You see, gentlemen, alien life. That's why the computer couldn't relate its initial readings to anything within its database. The most prevalent theory points to life which is quite similar to our own, but with slight differences in genetic makeup. Understandable, actually. Lar peered Deppy into the view screens, trying to understand the magnitude of what he was seeing. That's a lot of green down there. Well, Jack offered. It's actually a good deal more than what was there a few standard months ago. It seems the inhabitants of Fenrir are going through a phenomenal growth stage. They appear to be learning new farming techniques, irrigation, and other agricultural processes. It's not unlike what our own civilization experienced during certain times of new invention. They are farming more and more of the land, turning desert into the green fields we now see. We believe that is why the orbital scanners finally picked up the anomaly a few months back. If the Fenrite population had remained static, we might never have found them until after we colonized this planet. Why didn't I find them? Wrath demanded. Jack spoke with a reassuring tone. We don't blame you. Stop torturing yourself. You put your vessel on automatic landing, and the computer picked out the safest place. It would be like landing in the Sahara Desert on Earth. You would have found no signs of life there either. The problem was simply a sensor control. We'll have maintenance check it out when we get back in orbit. The Council of Technology wanted to take apart your ship about 3 months ago, but a decision was made not to. We wanted to run this test, but we wanted to run it with you. We had to have conclusive proof as to why your first explorer didn't reveal this anomaly. You see, due to your somewhat unethical decisions to return to Fenrir, some councils believe you knew that there was alien life here. They believed you simply wanted to retrieving the emeralds, despite the finding. A good deal of rebellion in a society will create that kind of cynicism. A review of your logs, however, indicated you never found the aliens despite your landing. This, of course, created a debate as to what happened, but we have our answer, and there is no need for us to worry about your motives any longer. Wrath bit his bottom lip. He supposed he should have been thankful for the remark, an absolution of blame, but his emotions lie elsewhere. He stared at the growing sections of green on the view screens. He had been to so many planets. They were always the same, rock and dust, empty lands waiting to be raped by miners and colonists. He never returned to the planets he scouted because he didn't want to see the change. He didn't think he wanted to see the desolation forced into something different, something that was perhaps never meant to be. But he was seeing it now. An alien life. That's what caused this change. Or so he thought. He explored and scanned so many planets, investigated barren worlds. He never found anything beyond rocks and lifeless oceans of water. He was the explorer. It was his mission objective to search out alien life. Here it was before him, and he was truly not prepared for it. 100 new questions bit at him. 100 new thoughts confused his previous convictions. An alien. Jack spoke as if he could read Wrath's mind. Would you like to get a closer look? Tomasa Sinclair entered the following note into her portable. Jack, after you're convinced the jewel distributor no longer has doubts, send him home. Tell him he should remain silent in the interests of Regency security. I've checked his profile, and I believe he will remain quiet and simply go back to his business on Janus. He may be an asset we can utilize in the future, but for now, it is better if we return him to his daily routine. He's been away from his business for a very extended period of time. Offer him whatever assistance he needs to quickly return to his life as it was, As for the pilot, I'd like to keep him with us. He is motivated by money, and a man like that can be dangerous. All it would take is one religious zealot with deep funded pockets, and this explorer may turn on us. Use your best judgment in convincing him it is in his own best interest to stay on. I have one last request. A minor branch of the Council of Galactic Agriculture wants a sample of the fenrite crops. 2 members of the main Department of Agricultural are well aware that the samples will provide little benefit, but they do not wish to stall the request, fearing their reservations will appear suspicious. Please advise the Health Council to place a ban on the transportation of plant life until further study is conducted. As always, treat this memo with proper security procedures. Deepest regards, Dr. Elizabeth Sinclair. Wrath glared uneasily. Is this a good idea? I have clearance for 1 low pass, Jack replied. How low? Pretty much as low as you want. I was only authorized to land in the desert where you made your first explorer, so we can't land again. But if you really want to get a good look at our newly discovered galactic neighbors, that shouldn't be a problem. Lar perked up. You mean we get to see the alien? We'll be able to pick them up with the cameras on full zoom. What do you say, Mr. Scampion? Care to take us down for a look? Wrath grunted, but he fixed on a grouping of the complex organic compounds as described by the computer. He punched in a low flight path, not the safest altitude for an explorer, more like a skimmer route. But for 1 pass, they'd be all right. He gave one last command to the shipboard computer. Fix all cameras on the unclassified organisms, range 4 kilometers, bearing 0.05. Maximum magnification, display on forward screens. Jack glanced at the images every now and then, but he focused on the reaction of the 2 men with him. He smiled. Lear sat wide-eyed and amazed. Will you look at that? This is unbelievable. They're like 2-legged walking lizards. They got faces like monkeys, but they're all covered in scales. I don't see any tails. Do they have tails? A few colonies in a different region have been reported to include tails, Jack said. Lar's eyes darted about, the many forms moving about the small compound, nestled in a crescent of medium-sized trees. Small huts of branches, tall grass, rock and mud dotted the backdrop. This is unbelievable. Wrath stared dead in the center of the screen. He said nothing. He thought of the last time he was here, on Fenrir. He remembered how he felt when he kicked that lonely rock. He thought he was alone, but apparently he wasn't. Sure, the Fenrites couldn't ignore the hum of the explorer vessel. At first, they sought cover. Some dove behind the cluster of trees which protected their village. Others darted into their small huts. In time, however, they all grew curious. They moved about in search of the strange noise. Finally, they looked to the sky, to an area where they had never seen anything but clouds and stars before. There were no birds on Fenrir, but there was something flying toward them now. They watched the craft sail by. They looked with an eye for detail, and they remembered what they saw. Dr. Sinclair frowned at her associate. You've seen the reports, haven't you? Of course you have. You know what's going on. She shook her head as she glanced at the notes before her. Before her fellow council member could speak, she announced her own interpretations. Dr. Eurobian, you created the genetic makeup for the Fenrites. I'm looking at your own notes as to why you elected the DNA patterns of the gorilla and the skink. You were certain they would form a societal group similar to that of the human species, with only subtle differences, to strengthen the presentation of alien origin. If that's true, then I want you to explain what the chaos is going on down there. There have been no battles, no skirmishes, no conflicts over land or resources. In fact, our scanners show that these creatures are banding together whenever possible. Why are the Fenrites forming this kind of community at such an early stage of development? This time, she didn't even pause to let him answer. I've got anthropologists crawling up and down my back, complaining about the lack of tribal conflicts. I've got sociologists abandoning their research due to the conformity of colonies placed thousands of kilometers away from each other. They say there's nothing to be learned here, no similar pattern to that of Earth in the pre-industrial age. This is not what I want to hear. Let me see if I can make you understand. If enough councils decide that this experiment has become tainted, we'll be left swinging on the line with only one pin to hold us down. It's your responsibility to analyze your work and offer some explanation as to why this has occurred. I also want you to pose fundamental questions for the sociologists to study. I don't care what kind. Just give them something to keep them busy. Jack directed Wrath to dock with the intersystem-propelled planning station, which had taken anchor to study Fenrir. The large, oval-shaped craft included several docking bays for small craft landing. Wrath accepted the instructions with equal amounts of relief and hesitation. He would no longer be kept locked up in the cargo ship, a ship he had grown very tired of, but he wondered what waited for him in this, one of the authorities' top-of-the-line vessels. Surely sophisticated holding cells lined detention blocks, and if they didn't want to lock him up here, plenty of transports zoomed in and about the station ready to take him to a local jurisdiction. He said nothing, simply landed the ship and waited for Jack to make the first indication of what would happen next. As the coordinator disembarked, he was approached immediately by a courier officer. "Dispatch for you. Just came in on last shuttle while you were out, sir." Jack took the casing, inspected the seal, and opened it. He downloaded the contents to his portable and read through the note in but a split second. He spoke as if reading from the message. "I have some good news for you, Mr. Smeel. You're going home." Wrath folded his arms across his chest. "I guess that also means I get to stay." Jack chuckled. "Mr. Scampion, you're going to have to learn to relax. When are you going to realize we're not out to get you? You can leave if you like, but I think you should listen to an offer." The statement echoed through the docking bay and rang with an inviting tone, especially to the explorer. What kind of offer? "There's going to be a good deal of investigation going on the next few months, probably even years," Jack responded. "Most of the studies are occurring here in orbit, but we will eventually be sending explorer ships for reconnaissance, perhaps even a few landings and sample gatherings. That means we will need explorer-licensed pilots. You're here. It seems like a good fit." "The Authority has its own explorer pilots," Wrath rebuked very harshly. He didn't want to remain a prisoner, even if it was under the guise of some kind of working permit. Jack just shook his long, narrow head. "Dubious to the end, eh? Is the end near? My end?" Dubious and concerned. Interesting traits for explorer pilot. But since you are being so open with your feelings, I will not hide the true reasons for us wanting you to stay. You are the first person to land on Fenrir. That is going to give you a place in the history books, like it or not. Oh, we'll cover up your reasons for coming back, but we'll be forthright with everything else. We've documented your initial explorer and the failure to uncover Fenrite existence. We're not going to blame anyone for that. We've already proven the cause, but rest assured it is an interesting point. Anyway, even though you found nothing, you are still the first human to walk on Fenrir. That means you were the first to enter the Fenrir atmosphere, the first to be exposed to the Fenrir environment, and the first human to walk on Fenrir soil. I've been the first to walk on a lot of different planets. None of them had an indigenous life form, Jack countered with a tone steeped in the gravity of what that meant. That's why we want to keep you here. Not because we want to hold you prisoner, but because of your role here. Don't you understand that? I understand that I'm going to be cooped up with the Authority and a bunch of lab coats for the next few months. At the very least. That's not going to pay the bills, and it's not going to bring me any quicker to retirement. Ah, but it is, Jack grinned. Here, the coordinator relied on his own savvy, his ability to read others. You will be treated as a contractor, which means you will receive payment for your time here. I have been authorized to offer you pay at an Authority Master Sergeant's rate for every standard hour you remain with us in this system and cooperate with our investigation. Jack had been given no true authorization, but he knew he would obtain it once he asked. He waited and watched for the explorer's reply, measuring the depth of reluctance. For Wrath, it sounded good, except for one word. What do you mean, cooperate? Jack rubbed his temples, but ended up chuckling to himself once more. You're a trying man, Mr. Scampion. I mean that you will be available for any media conferences, that you will not reveal your original intentions of piracy, that you will allow us to use your likeness in any presentations involving the initial explorer of Fenrir, and that you will follow the rules and regulations for civilians aboard Authority vessels. It does not mean that you will be coerced into work you do not wish to do, or that you will be asked to behave in a fashion against your morale standings or beliefs, unless you believe you are above lying about your desire to retrieving emeralds from this planet. The last held a slight bite of sarcasm. Wrath accepted it. He deserved it, but he remained skeptical of his true financial gain. The pay sounds good, but what about my explorer ship? You said something before about technicians wanting to take it apart. What about that? A Master Sergeant's pay isn't going to make up for that. Well, that is another matter. Here, Jack hemmed and hawed, played up his own concerns. We do wish to take the explorer ship. We want to analyze it as well as eventually archive it to a museum as the first craft to land on Fenrir. It deserves that. Don't you agree? I agree it's a big loss to me. The coordinator rubbed his chin. It's a problem. They're not going to give up that ship. And they're going to say that you forfeited it when you came here illegally. But you also have a cargo ship. They don't necessarily want that. That ship never landed on Fenrir. I'm sure I could convince them to leave the cargo ship in your possession. There would be no forfeit of that vessel. The explorer's mine, too, Wrath argued, and I'm not going to promise anything unless you promise to do something about that loss. Fine, Jack sighed. We'll replace it. Top-of-the-line Authority model, but with no weaponry. Agreed. Wrath considered the full merit of the proposal. Pay for sitting around an Authority station and a new explorer. It sounded too good to pass up. Agreed. 6. Evolve. For the most part, the researchers and Authority personnel kept Wrath busy with work he really didn't understand and really didn't care much for, except when they delivered his new explorer. He spent nearly 2 weeks standard, just going through it on a docking bay. After that, he made several requests for enhanced scanners, control modifications, comlinks, and access ports. And most of all, flight stabilizers. He worked with great joy on installing these features. No more bumpy atmospheric entries, no more bone-jarring turbulence. He fitted his new ship with the latest in Authority issue equipment. Stabilizers designed to lessen the impact of particle beams and guided projectiles. With these enhancements, the wings and engine could shake from here to Pluto, but anyone in the cockpit could perform microsurgery. He could only guess as to the monumental costs of such modifications, but no one seemed to care. Wrath loved the military for that. When Regency entrusted the Authority with the responsibility to patrol the entire galaxy, Their budget mushroomed in proportionate size. They didn't care about money. They didn't have to. Every new mining colony needed to ante up with a percentage of their own revenues or face marauders without Regency protection. Resources remained plentiful across the galaxy, grew with each explored and colonized planet, and the Authority had the deepest pockets of all. And since they kept honoring his requisitions, Wrath kept asking for more. They even paid him top dollar for his cargo ship. He didn't need it anymore, and he guessed the flight managers and maintenance crews wanted to free up the docking bay. They flew it out of the system right after he signed the transfer papers and acknowledged the acceptance of sale with a wristband scan. They even allowed him to take his Explorer out for system checks and flight tests, as long as he didn't get too close to Fenrir. Other than that, it was open flying, rather trusting on their part. He could have hit the Boscan props and taken off to the other end of the galaxy. No one could have stopped him in time. He guessed they really didn't consider him a prisoner anymore, and for his own ambitions, he had no real reason to leave. He wasn't being threatened with prosecution, yet he received monthly deposits into his account. The only thing they asked of him lately involved making some nominal long-range scans of Fenrir's weather patterns. He actually enjoyed taking the new Explorer out and maneuvering it through the empty star system. After some time, they almost forgot about him, treated him like a lower-ranking officer with some minor Explorer duties. Other than that, everyone else left him alone, but they sure paid him quite well, and for doing very little. A new ship, no long scouts, no hassles with making bids. He could have worked like this for a few more years, standard. He retained some apprehension over Jack's occasional hints of upcoming media briefings. Over that prospect, he grew less enthusiastic. He didn't want to deal with questions about why he missed the Fenrites on his first Explorer, mostly because he couldn't really answer them. He understood the theory all right. Malfunction with the scanners on his old Explorer, automatic landing in a desolate area, but he still couldn't believe he missed the Fenrites completely. That fact still bothered him. He kept going over his memory of the procedures. He tried to recall the scanning reports. He honestly believed he ordered the dispersal of independent probes and submersibles. If so, he wondered why they didn't pick up this so-called anomaly. He also kept wondering about the narrow focus of his Schaus sensors. It just didn't fit with his recollection. But for now, it was truly a moot point. They took his original Explorer from him a long time ago. He wondered if it was sitting in pieces in some Authority hangar, or if it was reassembled and waiting for museum bids. He considered asking Jack where it might end up. He thought he might like to see it. Then again, maybe not. As Jack kept pointing out, he and his ship were part of history now, part of the logs that would describe the discovery and study of the first alien. A great moment, one of the most significant he could possibly imagine. But in truth, not something he could accept with great pride. He didn't find the Fenrites. He skipped right over them as if they didn't exist. That's how they'd describe him in the history logs, and that was probably the type of question he would have to face from any briefing he would attend. Not a comforting thought, and he dreaded the day they might bring the outside media to the system to reveal the home planet of the first discovered alien. To his great relief, though, he heard of no scheduled media conferences, no visiting dignitaries, and no carnival-like gatherings to celebrate the discovery. Time passed, yet things remained quiet, professional. The Authority remained in control of the system, and the researchers continued their own observations in a guarded environment. Soldiers conducted themselves in stern fashion as technicians roamed the planning station with a mind to their examinations. Wraith clung quite happily to this atmosphere. He concentrated on his new Explorer, on the numerous modifications, and on his simple duties. He also watched his funds grow with each passing month standard. He had no expenses, had no true responsibilities, but reaped the benefits of his situation like an interplanetary stockbroker. He sank into the calm of his surroundings with a growing appreciation for what he had stumbled upon. The council chamber seemed brighter, not warm bright, but operating room bright, sterile bright. Shadows tightly defined the corners, and everything appeared narrow and fierce. The crisp light highlighted the gloom painted on most council member faces, but a few contented smiles broke through the unhappiness. Members who didn't mind the disaster, especially since it meant trouble for their arrogant leader. Dr. Sinclair puckered her lips in an exasperated scowl. She kept scratching her head nervously and shifting her weight in her chair as if sitting on an uneven pillow. While the members arrived and before the council came to order, she muttered to herself or whispered over her shoulder to an aide. She had no inclination of allowing this experiment to slip from her control, and when it came time for her to speak, she made it clear she still wielded the full power of her chair, but her gestures and composure betrayed her own misgivings. Her voice remained firm, no break in tone, but she avoided eye contact with those about her while she wrung her hands together in fits of ire. I won't deny that this has been a surprise, but we must remember the true scale, and even the very purpose of our experiment. We wanted to test the variables of development. Everyone involved wanted to gauge the different stages of advancement, to find something which may be the key to understanding our own growth. Basically, this is an investigation of how an alien organism develops under certain conditions. Which one of us was so sure as to predict the actual phases of growth? Which one of us was so naive to assume there would not be a surprise? Research remains a surprise. It is how we learn. That is why I say there may even be a benefit here, a benefit in dealing with advancement beyond our own reckoning. We must sometimes face the unexpected in order to gain knowledge. The most advanced discoveries occur by diving into the unknown. Yes, we face risks, but right now we remain in control of those risks. Most of all, I'm not convinced that a true problem even exists. A few coughs rattled about the room and her pasty flesh started to burn crimson. She clenched her fists on the table. I repeat, I do not see a problem. The system remains secure. The general population is aware of the discovery, but only in the most general sense. The authority remains at our disposal, and Regency Govern is allowing us to proceed. Proceed with our own objectives intact. Therefore, let us approach this as scientists, and not as politicians. Let us look at the facts. The Fenrites are industrializing. Did we expect they wouldn't? Coughs turned into whispers, and they are industrializing at a tremendous rate. Dr. Sinclair's voice grew in volume with her annoyance. I know what you are saying. I've seen the estimates. It is not just a simple breakthrough. They are advancing at incredible rates. They are completing close to 20 years of progress in a week's time standard. They are mining and utilizing precious metals, and they are constructing complex manufacturing facilities. And I say again, I am not convinced this is a problem. She almost stood. Her fury and resentment to those that took delight in these misfortunes brought a sneer to her lip. She wanted to openly challenge anyone that would dare her. But she remained in control, remained in her seat. We wanted to see the development of a civilization. We wanted to examine the correlation between our own advancement and that of an alien life form. They are moving faster than we did, but they are different. Anyone that expected the progress to move in an identical pattern to our own was, and is, a fool. She spoke the last word harshly and stared directly at her harshest critics. we created them to be different. Instead of fearing these differences, we should be studying them, understanding why their progress moves at such a pace. And as for the true concerns of those that bemoan the accelerated Fenrir development, I find it based in ignorance and unjustified fear. Yes, the Fenrites are inventing advanced technology. Yes, they are progressing faster than we could have ever estimated. Yes, they are becoming a global society, working together to advance their own sciences. But let me remind you all that we remain far ahead of them, as I know that this is the major concern. There is nothing which signifies a true threat to Regency, and there is no indication that this accelerated progress will continue. She huffed heavily with a shake of her head. Now, is it too much to ask that we begin studying this new phenomenon? Let us find out just how far the Fenrites have advanced. Let us examine their discoveries, and maybe even attempt to understand how they manage this accelerated process. If this is a behavior that we can somehow duplicate, we may find this to be one of the greatest discoveries ever made. The quiet at the planning station ended abruptly, and Wrath cringed at the first signs of tension which gripped both the Authority personnel and the research techs. The atmosphere shifted in an instant, as if an alarm blared over loudspeakers. Authority officers stiffened as the researchers scurried about, like confused rats in a new maze. He knew the signs, knew it meant trouble. Tempers shortened, and no one liked questions. It was like that moment in a bar right before a brawl. Everyone sat on the edge of their seat, either looking for an exit or someone to hit in the back of the head. Wrath usually moved for a door during times like these, but he really didn't want to give up his little gold mine. He initially wondered if an announcement had been made involving a galactic-wide notification of the Fenrites. Perhaps it was finally time to reveal the alien to the public. Time for the cameras, recorders, and dignitaries. Time for the Regency Governing Council to become fully involved with the proceedings. That would explain a great deal. The thought made him uncomfortable. Why not everyone else? But time passed, and no one new arrived. More time passed, and nothing changed. Most confusing. The personnel on the planning station remained much more concerned with the planet than with the potential of outside intervention. Nothing was prepared. No new administrative vessels arrived in the system, and no one posted a schedule of meetings. Yet the tension remained, and even grew, with each day standard. One day the station moved behind Fenrir's moon, and remained constantly out of direct sight of Fenrir. Wrath heard a rumor, something about the Fenrites possibly being able to see the distortion of the station, even with the curtain on. Wrath didn't understand how that was possible, but he knew enough not to ask questions. After one glare from an Authority supply officer, he stopped his Explorer enhancement requisitions as well. He watched from a distance, kept a mind to his ship, but ultimately he could not avoid the attention of the Authority's growing anxiety. First, they immediately restricted his flights. No more sons of Fenrir. Eventually they banned his Explorer missions altogether. No more test flights, no more leaving the docking bays, period. Then, they notified him of restricted areas of the planning station, warned him not to interfere or to trespass under the threat of Authority punishment. Wrath knew what that meant, and it wasn't good. Prosecution of military espionage was handled internally by the Authority, not by local jurisdiction. Conviction meant exidine. He had to remain constantly alert of his surroundings. He couldn't afford to make a single misstep and end up somewhere he didn't belong. Eventually, a wing colonel wanted him escorted off the planning station and out of the system completely. Fine with Wrath. It probably meant the end of his master sergeant's pay, but he wanted out now. It would be almost a relief to go back to scouting uninhabited planets. When Dr. Sinclair sat alone, her hands were folded under her chin. She made one statement into her portable, which magnified her predicament. The Fenrites have test-fired a crude rocket in the equatorial desert of their largest continent. She clicked off her portable as she shook her head. She didn't need to look at the data from the most current reports to remind her of the cataclysmic changes in her experiment. And it was her experiment. There was no denying that anymore. Every member of every council was more than happy to throw it in her lap, some even eager. She envisioned her critics dancing with joy over every new development. Even now, Regency Govern debated the issue, an unpleasant thought. She continued the narrative into her personal diary. Data has confirmed the rocket closely approximates early models of the mid-20th century used for both weaponry and space exploration. There are some questions as to the fuel and propulsion mechanics. Some observers wait for another launch, but I doubt there will be further reports on this matter. There is no evidence of mass production of these rockets, and that will probably be the last appearance of this type. The Fenrites seem to utilize their production capacity with great efficiency. They manufacture items solely for the purposes of research and development. There is no apparent wasting of resources on items which will soon become technologically obsolete. And for them, such obsolescence occurs with daily frequency. This is not to say the Fenrites have failed to develop a powerful manufacturing base. Quite the contrary. Advanced factories are constructed with a fervor which nearly matches the progress of their technology. The fact remains, however, that their production is geared toward maintaining the flow of invention and not to create product. In scientific principle, that thought was staggering. She could only imagine how the science of her own people would progress if all resources were focused on breaking one technological barrier after another. Consumption and saving would become secondary to the drive for knowledge. With the great expansion, the colonization of distant star systems, the massive gathering of new resources, the scientific community could move ahead in staggering leaps, perhaps even surpassing the current pace of the Fenrites. But her people did not care as much about science as they did about profits, or comforts, or luxuries. While Fenrite factories experimented with metallurgy, new human colonies mined diamonds to stud the interiors of stretch skimmers. Disgusting, she continued, as the Fenrites will probably not waste time in producing more of these crude rockets. It is my estimation that several key discoveries will follow. It is a stepping stone to powerful military weaponry and even space exploration. It is probably the single most disturbing event in the duration of this experiment. The greatest question regarding the Fenrites' progress involves the motivation. To date, there are no theories as to why they have progressed so far so fast. Their explosive population growth might explain the further development of agriculture and infrastructure construction. But then why waste time developing rockets? Actually, the most efficient Fenrite progress tends to occur in the areas of defense-related technology. It is difficult to determine what has spurred such experimentation. There is no predator, and there is still no sign of hostility among the original colonies or tribes. She grunted as she corrected herself. In truth, the original colonies and tribes placed on Fenrir no longer hold any true consequence. The Fenrites have become one single society, one whole global civilization. There are no perceived borders, no distinctions based on physical characteristics or on geographical origin. Since they have developed global communications, any dissimilarity based on technology has dissolved. They share their knowledge freely. Still, their dedication to production and technological advancement tends to point to a pattern of military buildup. This is perhaps the most perplexing and even alarming puzzle. The Fenrites have focused a large portion of their energies upon developing tools and devices which are militaristic in nature. On a peaceful world where there is no war, why would their advancement focus on these goals? Questions. Hundreds of questions, but probably not the time or the opportunity to discover the answers. Echoes of footsteps rustled along the corridors of the planning station like bats in a church attic. Not many techs remained to buffer the sound. Each day, the authority demanded the removal of more and more non-military personnel. They ordered the evacuation of over 3/4 of the research techs, and the handful that remained focused on long-distance scans. Rumor had it that they were left to monitor some potential cataclysm. Replacements arrived, but not in the form of scientific researchers. A section of authority soldiers took over the empty quarters. Pilots, actually. Tight-lipped, they walked about like winds of cold death. The advent of these pilots simply added to the hard-nosed tension Wrath faced each day, and every new officer looked upon him as more than just an annoyance. They considered him a trespasser and made no attempt to hide their growing distaste. It was all Wrath needed, the final incentive. He didn't mind giving up the pay now. He wanted out. He just finished packing and prepared to request final clearance for discharge when Jack entered his quarters. "I don't think you should leave," the coordinator stated, blank-faced. Wrath flashed an unappreciative glance at such a remark. "Well, the authority does, and to tell you the truth, I'm not arguing. I did argue. I want you here." The tone wasn't as accommodating as Jack's usual requests. This was an order, plain and simple. Wrath grit his teeth together. He didn't like this, not one bit. He was ready to leave. He wanted to leave, but he had more than enough meetings with this coordinator to know what Jack was all about. Jack was the guy that got things done, and there was a whole lot of power in that kind of ability, especially in a society with more councils than elected officials. In frustration, Wrath threw his pack on an empty chair. "You want me to stay? What the chaos for? Did you know some wing colonel on this station is watching every move I make? He's made it pretty clear the only way I'm going to take my explorer out again is if I'm leaving for good. What am I supposed to do here if I can't fly?" Jack seemed to weigh his words before offering a mysterious explanation for the restriction. "It's dangerous out there. The authority's just trying to keep things under control and to keep any civilians from getting hurt." "Dangerous? What do you mean?" "Raiders." Jack chuckled, a little nervous laugh, but a cracked smile nonetheless. "No, not raiders. They wouldn't dare show up here." "Then what's the problem?" Wrath insisted. "We're discovering new things about the Fenrites. Classified things." Wrath knew what that meant, too. He didn't bother asking questions that wouldn't be answered. He simply jumped on another reason for him leaving. "If it's dangerous, then maybe I should leave. I am a civilian. I don't really have the responsibility to take risks." Jax responded, as if dealing a death strike. "If you don't want to be billed for all that nice equipment you ordered, I suggest you stay." "I see," Wrath exhaled. "And since there's no way I can afford to make that kind of payment, I'm back to being a prisoner." Jack grinned again. "I just want us to understand each other. You know, a council member once told me you were dangerous because you could be motivated by money. I'm not sure that's the complete picture, but it's part of it. You'll take some risks to get ahead financially, but you worry about your own skin a little more than the usual thief or raiders. You might even give up that new explorer if you thought you were in real danger, so let me put that to rest. You're not in danger here, as long as you play by the rules." Wrath wanted to ask what these new set of rules entailed, but he focused more on the coordinator's interpretation of his personality traits. "Is that how you see me? Worried enough about my own safety that I might just cut and run?" Is that supposed to be an insult? Am I supposed to be offended? No, not at all. I think you understand what I'm saying, because I think you have me pegged as well. Being a coordinator is perfect for me, although manipulator may be a better term. I size up the situation, just like you. I just do it quicker. I'm not boasting. I have to do it fast. I can't afford the luxury of care. I've got to pull people together, hundreds of people with different agendas. I have to deal with that on a daily basis. I miss things, make judgments a little too quickly, but usually it works out. You do the same thing. You watch, you analyze, you put things in proper order, and then move. And that's why I just want you to understand the situation before you make any bad decisions. And just, what is the situation? No more bull. Why do you want to keep me here? It doesn't add up. Jack looked the explorer dead in the eyes. I guess it's just fitting that the first human to land on Fenrir witnessed the destruction of the planet. Dr. Sinclair's voice trailed off with monotone acceptance of her own fate. She would be replaced as head of this council. She would be forced into retirement and ordered into seclusion by Regency Govern. There would be no further study, no book deals, no galactic tours, and absolutely no lecture circuit. The General Council of Regency Govern has taken this out of our hands. At the authorities' urging, the Fenrite experiment will be concluded without further risk to Regency or its population. All Fenrite colonies will be destroyed by nuclear devices launched by melee combat ships. All remaining research technicians will be recalled from the system and debriefed upon completion of Fenrite termination. The system is off-limits to all new arrivals and will be secured by the authority. All scientific scans are to cease, and there is to be no follow-up explorations of the planet or the system. All documentation of this experiment will be destroyed. All council members are ordered to hand over all personal notes and diaries. All future discussion of this is restricted. Any council member attempting to disseminate information of this topic will be prosecuted by the authority for treason. This council will continue its research, but all references to Fenrir will be classified. Dr. Sinclair held her head up. She looked defiantly into the circle of those gathered around her. I have no regrets. We have accomplished exactly what I had intended. The belief that alien life exists has been retained, and this council shall continue its studies. We shall eventually find what it is we are all looking for. I hope that I am remembered when that day arrives. I now officially retire. Roth forgot who he was talking to. He allowed his emotion and confusion to seep into his response. He spoke a little too quickly and a little too heatedly. Destruction. That's right, Jack answered coolly. It seems the Fenrites are more advanced than we previously thought. Some have speculated that they kept their most advanced weaponry hidden in underground research labs. There's plenty of reasons for that. Or it seems the Fenrites are an aggressive being, and there are many different warring factions on the planet. He spoke this lie without a hint of anxiety. His voice level, his expression constant. Sabotage, espionage, even all-out open warfare would explain why the Fenrites would hide their weapon stores. They're not hiding them from us. They don't even know we exist. They're hiding them from each other. In fact, war appears to be their sole motivation. That's why their population lives in the huts that we saw, while their armies have nuclear weapon capability, powerful enough to destroy every living thing on the surface. And they appear to be ready to do or just that. Wrath just stared. He remembered the only time he saw the Fenrites, the small village of ramshackle shelters. How could they have nuclear weapons? Jack's words seemed to answer this question, but only in the vaguest terms. Jack continued the deception, but spoke with such sincerity, it sounded as if he had true empathy for the average Fenrite, as if he wanted to do something to help. It's a paradox, really. When we found them, we thought they were pre-industrial, and in some ways they still are. The general Fenrite population is nothing but a group of peasants. Nothing is done for their benefit. The primary objective is war. Maybe that's why large sections of their planet remain barren wastelands. Large skirmishes with weapons will do that. And they have advanced to a point where they can manufacture weapons. Powerful weapons. But nuclear weapons. That doesn't... Jack cut him off. Don't make the same mistake many of the researchers made. They wouldn't believe it either. It forced them to ignore the facts. They kept trying to tie the Fenrites with our own history, but it seems they didn't progress like we did on Earth. We tried to define them in terms similar to our own. That was the mistake. As far as societal development goes, they're near the Dark Ages. Peasants, farmers, the like. But on a military scale, that's where they dedicated their energy. That's the paradox I was talking about. In terms of Earth history, they're a 15th century society with late 20th century weaponry. I don't know how to explain it, but like I said, they're not like us. Jack paused, nodded his head as if just remembering something. He slowly pulled satellite reconnaissance pictures from his flexible case. Here, if you don't believe me, take a look at these. The pictures waited patiently for Wrath's grasp. They did not shake even the slightest in the coordinator's hand. As Wrath flipped through them, they hid their own deception. Lies of doctored images and professed untruths about the surface of Fenrir. Missile silos, Jack stated. I see them. Reith eyed the photos, but ultimately failed to understand what they had to do with him. This discussion was supposed to be about why Jack wanted him to stay. It wasn't. It was about the Fenrites, and he failed to make a connection as to why he was being asked to remain. So they've got nuclear weapons, so what? So they're about to use them, Jack stated coldly. Over the past few weeks, we've monitored increased hostility. It all seems to be coming to a head. 2 Fenrir days ago, conventional weapons were pulled back, but with no indication of any peace accord among the Fenrite factions. Not a good sign. We anticipate all-out nuclear exchange planet-side in less than 1 full Fenrir day. Wrath grunted. Maybe I didn't make myself clear. That's the Fenrite's problem. What does this have to do with me? We want you here as a witness. Witness nuclear war? Wrath blurted out. What the chaos for? For many reasons, but mostly to protect the integrity of Regency Govern and the authority. Me. That doesn't make any sense. I'm the Raiders, remember. I'm the one who's motivated by money. That's what one of your council cronies said. And what did you say? I was worried about protecting my own skin. How can I protect the authority? We were cutting through the bull. Jack's features froze into a stern demeanor. That's what you wanted. And what did I call myself? A manipulator. I have to bring everyone together. So look at this from a political standpoint. We found alien life. In response, we secured the system with the authority. Unfortunately, that decision may come back to haunt us. If Fenrir is turned back to a desolate and lifeless wasteland, what do you think people are going to wonder about? They're not going to believe the Fenrites blew themselves up. We can tell people about the warring nature of the Fenrites, but we don't have any real proof. The general public may blame the authority, so we need a witness, just in case. You're the only one around, so you just got elected. And that's that. Wrath grimaced, nearly spit on the floor. No, that's not that. Jack feigned anger. Hopefully you're not going to witness anything. Hopefully Fenrir will still be here tomorrow, next week, and next month. We want to stop this. We don't want to interfere. It's really not our place. We don't even know how our plans are going to affect the Fenrites, but we just can't let them destroy themselves. 7. Shot down. The pilots hit the bays first. Wrath watched them file by as he was ushered, rather vigorously, to a waiting area. The military pilots ignored him, ignored everything, moved with the same calculated precision that carried them through their daily duties. Give them an order, and they carry it out with precision. Wraith wondered if this was how they approached other battles. Then he wondered what other battles they might have faced. Crushing raiders. Activity, probably. But what raiders? Force would even consider engaging 12 full groups of melee-class ships. Small, maneuverable vessels capable of high pursuit, capable of tracing the path of lightning across a desert sky. Raiders didn't have mobile observation stations or carriers. A force of this many melees would make short work of even an advanced cruiser. He didn't get to see them launch. The pads remained off-limits to him as long as the melees were docked. Security officers escorted him to a secondary command post while the pilots scrambled. Here, all monitors remained secured, all scanners shut down. The silence swallowed him. Jack entered, but barely acknowledged the explorer. He perused his own portable before making a blunt statement. Time to go. It was the last thing Jack said while they remained on the station. He led Wrath to the freight bay. Wrath saw his new explorer. The Authority had moved it off the main pads, probably to facilitate the melees. They passed it without acknowledgement. Jack rounded a few more pads before he embarked upon a small escort. No guns on this ship. No scanners and hardly any armor. Basically a deep space shuttle made for generals to move from one flagship to another, to view the expanse of space through the wide bubble-like view shields, both overhead and forward. 2 Authority flight officers waited in the cockpit. Wrath wasn't even going to fly. He was exactly what Jack said he was going to be, a witness, and nothing more. One flight officer turned, said nothing, but watched the coordinator intently. When Jack nodded, he mouthed something into his headset and initiated takeoff. The small ship glided into space. The view was staggering. It was like being in a glass bubble propelled through the void. The system's sun blazed like a giant ball of fire. The stars in the opposite direction melded together like a long dotted streak of bright white chalk dust. The planet Fenrir loomed in the forward view shield. It appeared much like Wrath remembered on his very first explorer. Large sections of blue signified the vast oceans of water. Brown and yellow divided the deep aqua, indicated the existence of land. Fluffy white clouds flowed around the sphere like aimless ghosts, looking for a place to land. In many ways, it appeared just like Earth, and streaking toward this planet were tiny flashes of bright orange. The melees darted through space in full group formation. As if guided by the same hand, they penetrated the atmosphere en masse. Most of the propulsion tails were lost in the clouds, but a few remained visible. One flight officer turned back to the coordinator. "We've reached Watchpoint Alpha, sir. Speed and course locked in with planet rotation." "Fine. Fine." Jack studied his portable as the flight officer turned his attention back to the pilot controls. Fenrir continued to fill the front view shield. A massive portion of its largest continent held the center. As the transport moved with the spin of the planet, it looked as if the planet was frozen, suspended in space with no rotation. Only the upper atmosphere clouds appeared to move. Wrath watched intently, searching for signs of the melees. He noted a few propulsion signatures darting to the poles. "I think they broke formation," the explorer announced. Jack was rather apathetic. "Of course they have. They're breaking into a pattern of full coverage of the planet. If they're going to shoot down those missiles, they'll have to be placed in perfect intercept position. And there's still no guarantee this is going to work. How long we will have to wait? I doubt very long. We identified coded messages emanating from the planet that contain launch code characteristics, and we observed several birds being fueled in their nests. Estimation is that missiles with nuclear warheads will leave their silos within the next few minutes. A flight officer interrupted. Melee wing leaders have signaled position ready. Command has ordered standby. Will we get to hear them too? Wrath wondered aloud. Of course not, Jack grunted, as if the question was not worthy of his response. They're on a secure channel. Then what should I be watching for? Flashes of light, Jack replied without looking up from his portable. Dr. Sinclair could do nothing but wait. Wait for the courier ship to deliver the sealed report from Jack Lassonelli. Regency allowed her that. Jack would simply note that the experiment was closed successfully. After that, she could retire into the abyss of concealment and isolation. That's all that what waited for her, and little else. They would let her subscribe to scientific journals, even keep up with the work of the council she just resigned, but it would be a one-way relationship. She could not add her own input, offer her own suggestions, or even contact some of her close friends that remained on the council. She would no longer be a scientist. She would barely be an outside observer. She wondered how many authority moles would watch her to make sure she kept out of sight and out of mind of Regency's general population. She wondered what their orders would be if she decided to start writing her memoirs on planetary comms. They'd probably execute her before she could hit the send order. She shook her head as she mutter-ed. A few of the more inept scientists that remained on the council, people she placed the majority of the blame upon. All they had to do was make a few genetic alterations. The general public was not all that bright. There was no need to get fancy. But the geneticists that created the Fenrite species had lauded their creativity, boasted that no one would ever discern from study that the Fenrites were an Earth-born species altered to appear alien. A lot of good that did. In a day or two standard, there wasn't going to be a Fenrite left to study. The planet was going to be washed clean by a nuclear bath. And why? Because the same idiot geneticists couldn't determine why the so-called alien was advancing so quickly. But they didn't get the blame. They were still left to research, to study the remains of her experiment, and to determine why it ultimately failed. Like angry bees swarming free from a nest under assault, the melee set upon Fenrir's atmosphere. These tiny ships zipped across the sky in pre-coordinated assault patterns. They broke from groups into sections and finally into wings as they covered the 4 large continents of the planet and targeted each major colony. Only half of the vessels were armed, spearhead missiles with megaton nuclear payloads, but more than enough to do the job. Detonation of a mere quarter would leave Fenrir a radiated wasteland. The other half were needed to carry out the deception for the long-range scanners. Malays responsible for simulating the signature of ground-based nuclear weapons dove deep toward the surface. They took to the tops of the ever-expanding Fenrite colonies, not caring that the aliens would be able to clearly witness their vessels. They hovered over target areas like tiny clouds, harbingers for the fury of nuclear storm. The Fenrites did not scramble for shelter, as they did the first time a spacecraft entered their sight. Those that had witnessed Roth's Explorer and other Regency vessels conveyed the existence of such spaceships across the planet. Fenrites stood ready to observe and to learn. Though the number of craft left them somewhat uneasy, most Fenrites surveyed the hovering invaders with great interest. They took detailed notes of hull and exterior engine design. Many used their own imaging devices to capture even greater information. A discriminating eye was put to seizing the differences between these flying crafts and the science vessels that previously graced their atmosphere. Every scrap of information was absorbed. Melee pilots ignored the reactions of the Fenrites. In mere minutes, the alien would cease to be. Over secured channels, the wing colonels issued their readiness. And so the station general with nuclear clearance stood firm at the main bridge of the planning station. As the lead officer upon this interstellar station, his supremacy of command went unquestioned. And with such military power on standby, the authority didn't have just the final say, it had the only say. There was no regulation or even courtesy warranted to advise the coordinator. There was no overlap in jurisdiction. No other council, except for Regency Govern, could change his orders. And Govern had already made their intentions quite clear. Still, General Hollins knew the history of this experiment, knew its origin. He wasn't about to allow the authority to take it in the rear for erasing the indiscretions of these misguided eggheads. If there was going to be an order to fire such ordnance, it would come not from him, but from the liaison of research and exploratory councils. He remained in direct communication with Council Coordinator Lassonelli as he issued a coded message directly to the coordinator's portable. The directive was nearly innocent in its simplicity. Melees in position, station scanners set, sequence to initiate on your acknowledgement. Jack decoded the message in his mind, making no record of the directive. Unflinchingly, he typed one word. Acknowledged. He hit the send order, knowing that this simple keystroke meant the end of the Fenrites. Orders to proceed spread to the Melees through the secured web of ship-to-ship communications. There was no hesitation among the pilots. They expected the order, welcomed it. The Melees hovering 30 meters over Fenrir's surface fired first. Elongated flares rose upward into the sky, sailed into the ionosphere, and hung suspended like sparklers in the hands of God. Tails of fire crossed the atmosphere, a light show captured by the authorities' scanners and observation cameras. Ops at the station's monitors immediately stamped the records and placed them into secured databanks, but they did not list the objects as simple flares. They attributed each blip to an airborne missile fired from Fenrir launch sites. Penrath looked back and forth from the front view shield to the coordinator. He couldn't ignore the flashes of light cutting through the white clouds, but Jack's stern face held a message of its own. The coordinator said nothing. His concentration remained almost completely fixed upon his portable, though he allowed himself a few quick glances at the planet when the flares reached mid-flight. The flight officers in the cockpit said nothing, and Rath felt the silence add to the tension. He asked a question more to break the quiet than out of curiosity. In truth, he already knew the answer. "Are those nuclear missiles?" Jack spoke as if identifying a body in a morgue. "Unfortunately, yes. Are you getting reports on your portable?" "Yes." "Well, how many were fired?" "Too many," Jack responded somberly. He shook his head softly and returned his attention totally to the coded messages flashing across his small terminal. He didn't look at Rath again. He didn't need to. The explorer had seen exactly what he had wanted him to. After firing their flares, the hovering Melees darted back into space. Only those ships armed with nuclear-laced spearheads remained within Fenrir's atmosphere. As the elongated flares began their descent, the Melees launched all spearheads. The missiles assumed a flight pattern accompanying the falling flares, moving besides them like burly bodyguards with malevolent intentions. Never before had the authority utilized so much firepower. The cooperative guidance system targeted every inch of Fenrir's surface, not just the main colonies. The impact, the force of detonation, the fallout, every angle of devastation would have calculated to carry out full coverage. Not a single living organism would survive the assault. There would be nothing left but the original rock, and even a good deal of that would be blasted away. That was, at least, the intended result. Anyone studying the Fenrites to this point should have expected the surprise. An authority scanning technician observed the first firing. He called his finding immediately to the station general. "Sir, I read a planet-based launch." "Another one." "Sir, several launches have just been identified, all from surface-based sites." The general stood like an ice statue. A post-major stepped briskly to the technician station. He replied after one quick glance. "Confirmed." He looked to the other techs. "All ops report." They answered in quick succession. "Launches detected. Several airborne objects on scanners. Reading missiles in the air." General Hollins remained emotionless. He stepped over to the scanning station. "Am I to understand the Fenrites have fired missiles?" The major replied almost curtly. "No other explanation, sir." The general growled. "I'm not even sure that's an explanation I can accept, Major. What are they targeting?" "The spearheads, sir." A dozen questions and 100 curses rushed to the general's lips, but he stifled them all. It remained his charge to always consider the safety of the station and its crew, and this was what drove his simple response. "Recall all melees, dock them and have them refueled." Jack rubbed his forehead as he reread the coded message. He muttered to himself silently. Unexpected, but not a true surprise. They waited too long, and the Fenrites were moving so fast, unbelievably fast. He closed his portable as he stared directly at the planet. The Fenrites waited, much like the humans waited, but their whole world hung in the balance, their very existence. They stood in their homes or gathered in colony centers. A sense of trepidation prevailed across the entire planet, but they did not simply accept their fate. They would fight to survive, and their hope rested in the form of radar-guided and heat-seeking defense missiles with high-charge explosives. They created these missiles almost out of instinct, a desire to protect their land from the metal birds which seemed to stalk them. It was the use of the flares that saved them. The humans were so intent on creating the illusion that the Fenrites destroyed themselves. They composed the very circumstances which made the interceptor missiles so effective. The flares, used to make it appear as if the Fenrites fired nuclear missiles, attracted the Fenrites' countermeasures. The spearheads rode a path right beside these flares, and the flames attracted the heat-seeking defenses of the Fenrites, like sugar attracts ants. The radar-guided missiles were less effective, but even they managed to take out more than their share of spearheads. In the end, only 2 melee-launched spearheads reached their targets. For the Fenrites, 1 was too many. Their planet was saved. They would survive, but one highly populated colony center and a smaller manufacturing center suffered devastation to the point of total eradication. The destruction captured the fear of every inhabitant, and no Fenrite could ever ignore or forget what happened on that day. Word spread among the global community, word of the tragedy. Fenrites had died at the hand of a hostile, outward foe, and the entire planet felt the loss. When night fell upon each city, town, and village, they looked to the stars, not with hope or joy, but with disdain, and they muttered the existence of this enemy to their world. 2 recorded detonations, that was all. One must have occurred on the other side of the planet, for Jack only saw one bright flash synonymous with nuclear discharge. He waited for long minutes, but no further explosions occurred within his sight. The rest of the spearheads were destroyed when the Fenrite missiles burst against the flares. The conventional charge was great enough to destroy the arming and detonating circuitry within the spearheads. The missiles fell to the ground like rigid, toothless snakes. No true danger to the Fenrites, but an opportunity for them to learn even more. Wrath witnessed the flash, but he anticipated more. He expected the planet to burn with fire. It did not. He had seen the Malays regroup in space and return to the station. He could only conclude that they had accomplished their mission. He turned to Jack with enthusiasm. Enthusiasm unshared by the coordinator. The explorer could not understand the look of confusion, the beads of sweat on Jack's forehead. I only saw one. They stopped the rest, didn't they? Jack didn't answer. The Malays were recalled. Wrath persisted. They did it. The crisis is over. Jack curled his bottom lip. He was not ready to deal with the explorer. He wasn't ready to deal with any of this. Keep quiet, he ordered. Wrath recoiled. He sat silent, but he began to watch the coordinator intently, followed Jack's eyes as they perused coded lines on his portable. Jack heaved a heavy breath. He wasn't used to this. He had lost control, and he had no answers. He stood from his seat and moved to the cockpit. He whispered something into the flight officer's ear. Wrath struggled to hear, but could not catch a single word. Still, the coordinator's movements spoke volumes. Jack returned to his seat and his eyes fell heavily upon the explorer. Wrath met his glance with an expression of anticipation. Obviously, things have not gone as expected, Jack began. Right now, nothing's obvious to me, the explorer pressed. Jack swallowed hard, and his tone revealed exasperation. I guess that's somewhat true, but you do know what we were trying to do here, trying to stop nuclear war. You didn't. No, you saw the flash. What did you think that was? A firecracker? I also saw the Malays leave. That means it's over, and I only saw one explosion on the planet. There were two, another one on the other side of the planet. I thought you were worried about the whole planet. We are. We wanted to stop them all. For the first time, Jack sounded less than convincing. His eyes and expression betrayed a larger sense of concern, a deeper problem, and Wrath found reason to doubt the coordinator's honesty. To the explorer, it finally appeared as if Jack was sorry the planet was still there. Jack regrouped the best he could. Look, the detonation of one nuclear device on a planet has huge consequences. These Fenrites are warmongers. Now that one has been fired, they'll fire more. They won't be happy until they destroy the whole planet. It didn't sound valid, not by a long shot. Wrath knew a little about Earth's own history, and professed as much as he offered his own considerations. We used an atomic bomb on Earth. People died. It was horrible, and we learned from it. We didn't blow up the Earth. Jack cringed. Too many factors gnawed at his worries. Too many pitfalls opened before him. Wrath wasn't supposed to see this. He was supposed to see the eradication of Fenrir. The deception was falling apart, and he fought desperately to bring it back under his control. How many times do I have to tell you? This isn't Earth, and the Fenrites aren't like us. We can't say what they might do, how they might react. It's a whole new ballgame. Wrath decided to say little more. He allowed Jack to take the lead. Fine. What now? I've made an adjustment to our flight orders. We're going planet-side. We have to estimate the damage at the 2 strike sites. Wrath couldn't believe the order. In this ship? What are you, crazy? This is a space shuttle, a ship-to-ship transport. You don't recon in something like this. We're here, so we're going in, Jack stated with finality. Are you nuts? Send a Malay in there for recon. They're better outfitted for this. The coordinator exploded. Malays are under authority jurisdiction. This ship is under my orders. Yeah, but I'm not, Wrath shouted back. Then get out. Very funny, asshole. Jack raised the index finger of his right hand, but said nothing further. He called an order to the flight officer piloting the craft. "Bring us in." Wrath gritted his teeth. He thought atmospheric entry was bad in his Explorer. This time, he nearly passed out. Even when the transport finally reached a safe flying altitude within Fenrir's atmosphere, his stomach turned over and over. The large bubbles for viewing space buried Wrath in a sensation of free-falling through the bright blue sky. Jack ignored him. "Bring us to the second explosion site. I want full camera surveillance. Record everything." The pilots said nothing. They simply followed the orders. They were authority officers, but they were placed under the coordinator's charge. They reacted as if Jack was nothing less than the station general. The transport streaked across the sky, from light into darkness, and back into the edges of an orange sunrise. The first light of dawn skimmed the edges of scorched ground as the vessel reached maximum viewing distance of the second detonation site. The damage was staggering. 20 square kilometers were nothing but dust and ash. Not a single structure remained within this radius. Further out, a few blackened poles spiked themselves into the ground, the only remnants of a flattened Fenrite city. Around the rim of the detonation crater, burnt debris formed a gray circular border, lifted 2 or 3 meters up from the now leveled surface. All life was absent. Staggering levels of heat flushed out from the core, still flaring across the countryside like storms of fire. Jack looked upon the devastation with a cold grimace. He said nothing about the destruction. Instead, he ordered a reconnaissance just beyond the edge of desolation. The transport pitched in the turbulence, wavered within the folds of hot winds. The pilot brought the ship up to escape the rough air. As the transport settled into calmer winds, Jack stepped from side to side of the ship. He looked across the landscape, judging the damage with a warlord's eye. He gauged the estimated casualties as a mark of lost production capacity. He did the same with the hollowed-out factories on the far edges of pure desolation. He wanted the pure elimination of the Fenrites, that he did not get, but here was a staggering blow to their burgeoning population and industrial output. This would certainly serve as a setback for the Fenrites, but would it slow them down? He doubted it. They kept surpassing every estimate of advancement based on their limited population and supposedly stretched intelligence. Why not another surprise? They'd probably rebuild this colony in the wink of an eye. In truth, he couldn't guess what they might accomplish. "Take us to the first detonation point. I want..." The flight officer stopped listening to the coordinator as his attention fixed fully on a transmission through his headset. When the pilot spoke, it was without regard to Jack's order. "Station Control is advising us of a missile launch in our area. We have been targeted." Wrath tensed at the warning, braced himself within his seat. He looked to Jack with burning anger. "You idiot! I told you we shouldn't have gone in. Shut up!" Jack seethed. But more, he appeared surprised, as if this was unthinkable. Wrath saw the astonishment, but he didn't understand it. If the Fenrites were capable of launching such powerful nuclear missiles, then certainly they would have the ability to fire missiles at aircraft. "Do you have a fix on the missile?" Jack demanded of the pilot. The officer was nothing less than curt. "Sit down, strap yourself in, and be quiet." Wrath almost laughed, but he was too scared. He clenched his fists together as the transport went vertical. He could feel the pressure growing on his chest, pressing against his ribs, forcing the air out from his lungs. He jammed his eyes shut, but his head still felt as if it was about to explode. Transports of this class didn't have Boscon props. They were designed primarily for limited space flight, and the engines fought desperately to break free from Fenrir's gravity. 20th century rockets reached escape velocity with greater efficiency. Still in vertical climb, the transport pitched right at the pilot's command. Through the clear bubble overhead, Rath saw a lance with an orange tail skid meters past the hull. He heard the pilot mutter it, and he understood. The evasive action caused a serious reduction in climbing speed. The pilot would have to level off, even dive to generate velocity before returning to a vertical climb. Rath could still see the orange glow of the Fenrite anti-aircraft missile. It did not follow. It had lost its guidance and burned out in the upper atmosphere. Lights dazzled before his eyes as the ship broke downward. With a sudden lurch, it reverted to a vertical climb. Rath passed out for a few seconds. As he regained consciousness, he felt the ship rattling uncontrollably. No longer in a pitched climb. They were descending, fairly angled, but definitely going down. He struggled to look out the forward view shield, but he could not shake his vision into focus. He felt queasy and almost passed out again. He shut his eyes, bent forward as far as his straps would allow, and took several deep breaths. With clear sight slowly coming back to him, he looked to Jack. The coordinator frantically dismantled his portable, yanking wires and crushing chips under his boot. Rath didn't take the time to ask. The horizon finally appeared in the forward view shield. They were about to land, or crash. 8. Safety. It was a rough ride, an unsteady descent, a hard touchdown, and a bone-jarring stop. But the Authority pilot landed the transport safely upon the flattened rock of the nearest desert, away from any Fenrite colonies. When the transport came to a halt, Rath unhitched his strap, ignored the coordinator, and moved directly to the 2 Authority flight officers in the cockpit. He spoke with clear respect. "I'm a civilian. You guys are in charge. What do we do?" The pilot repaid the explorer's deferment with honesty. "I've transmitted for an emergency pickup. I've already received acknowledgement from station control. 2 Malays are on the way to pick us up. We evacuate the ship and move a half-kilometer west of this transport. Wait for the Malays to land, and we get out of here." Rath shot a glance to the coordinator, making it clear he was going to follow these instructions and to chaos with anything Jack might say. He moved aside to let the flight officers get to the escape hatch and followed without further question. Jack grimaced, but exited the transport in good order. The 4 men jogged quickly across the barren rock. The 2 flight officers unholstered sidearms. One took the lead, the other followed in the rear. As Rath looked over his shoulder and back upon the transport, he couldn't ignore the blackened damage to the starboard rear panel. The hull was shredded. He could only wonder how close the hit came to a full breach. He was glad he didn't know about this until now, when they were already on the ground. With that much damage to a vessel that was not truly designed for atmospheric flight, landing safely was like a winning the lottery. The big one, the intergalactic pot. "Blast good pilot," he whispered to himself. They moved in a zigzagging pattern, not taking anything for granted. The lead flight officer monitored a small emergency device that served 2